All right. Then without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Prime Minister.
3, 2, 1. The feeling of control is the fundamental feeling of the ability of people to feel good and to feel as if their situation can change. On the alternative, you feel like God is not powerful enough to fight evil, and there is no point for you to believe that your situation can change. I think, firstly, these people will perceive this as a test as opposed to punishment from God. Because, A, people don't want to feel like they have sinned to the point at which God is mad at them. Most people want to feel good just intuitively, thus this will push them to believe that this is just a test and not a punishment. But secondly, I think in terms of Christianity, the Bible in multiple chapters says that this specifically, God does it as a test as opposed to punishment, because God is not evil and he does not want to punish people but wants to re-educate them. So I think when talking about Christianity, this is just trivially true. I think that secondly, Christianity is mostly believed by the poor for two structural reasons. The first one is that they want to know their struggles have not been in vain. All of those people that are probably living in their worst circumstances in terms of security and finances probably lead the worst lives just mentally and physically, and they want to know that their struggles have not been in vain. Thus, they reach out to religion, which tells them you will go to heaven and then be eternally happy. But secondly, a lot of Christian activity is promoted towards poor people. A lot of the kitchens that are for homeless people, a lot of the centers that are for people who have not had homes and just for women in need, are with Christian funding and all of those things. So actually Christianity has a massive influence, especially within the poor people. And I think that prosperity theology is much better for how those people feel and how they live their lives, because they will feel like they can change their situation comparatively more. Why is this the case? I think that firstly, the info slide states that with good deeds and with following the Bible and all of those things, you can change from one place to another. But secondly, I think the deeds that are described in the Bible are just achievable. You need to be nice. You need not to do crime. This is not something that is so demanding of people, thus they can achieve it. I think that alternatively, they believe that they cannot change it because it's a structure of evil. Because A, you have no power to fix evil, because God is comparatively more responsible than you to fight evil. You're responsible to battle your own demons. Secondly, God literally failed. This has happened, like structural inequality, people being poor. And this is something simple, and God has done nothing about it. On the comparative, you perceive it as it is a test now, where you believe that this specific structure is sinful for God and all of those things. You believe that God has failed because this is not something that God wanted. And just thirdly, even if you try to combat it on their side of the house, they know that they're not going to achieve actually improving their conditions. They would probably achieve voting and trying to push for structural change, but they know that this structural change will not affect their lives whatsoever in their lifetime. And I think that this is a great example of how Moses never actually reached the promised land. This is something within the Bible. Thirdly, I think this feeling of control is essential for individuals for both their actions and feelings. Why is this the case? I think that actions, firstly, this pushes them to be good and just to have this incentive. Know that life is difficult, and especially doing good things when put in a situation of not great material conditions is incredibly demanding, such as it's time consuming, it is effort consuming, you have to put your life to it. Thus, a lot of people don't want to do it because it's hard. A lot of them are dealing with depression. A lot of them have those mental struggles. It's not like it's inachievable. It's just that it's hard to make yourself exercise, for example. It's hard to make yourself be nice to others when you know that they're not nice to you. And I think that this tells you that you will be rewarded at a point at which you actually be nice to them and all of those things. And it's really hard to do it if not rewarded. And sure, the Bible has other mechanisms to reward you, such as heaven, for example. But I think the other mechanisms that religion provides you as opposed to this one are not that effective because A, they're just distant. Your life now is shit. Probably in 20 years when you die, you will go to heaven, but this is something very distant. On our side of the house, you want to improve your life now, that's why you do it. But secondly, you just have to not be evil in order to go to heaven, for example. You don't have to be actively good. On our side of the house, you get rewards for being actively good and not just not being evil. I think that this will lead to good things happening to you in and of itself, because I think a big push from opposition will be that actually good things will not happen to you even if you do it. But I don't think that's the case, because panel, where people are working hard, they will probably improve their financial situation. This is how it works. Hard work pays off. You are going to get a promotion. You're going to educate yourself in order for you to get the better job. You're just being nice to people leads to people giving you favors and like employing you and all of those things. Before I continue, PY from closing.
Working hard is not working hard in your job on your side of the house. It is loving your God more. This will not get you material wealth in the real world. Therefore, they will get
read the Bible. Like a lot of working hard is not loving God more. It's just about being nice to other individuals and just putting in the work to care for your family, for example, to make more money for them and all of those things. It's just both. You cannot claim it's one. And I think in terms of secondly, even if you don't perceive that you will financially improve your situation, I think you will socially improve your situation. At the point at which you're nice to other individuals, they're likely to respond in the same way because they want to create connections with you. Your church will be more happy with you because you're following the doctrine better. Thus, people from your church even will be nicer to you. I think even if there is no financial benefits, you getting closer to God you will perceive like your life is improving. And this is the bottom line. This feels as if your life is improving and like this was God's plan all along. And I think other people around you will also benefit from the care and the community that you're making. I think alternatively, you will feel hopeless. You will feel like you cannot fight the system and your life doesn't matter. And I think you will even lose faith in God because this is just bad without purpose. On our side of the house, there is purpose. It is a test. But secondly, just God is not strong enough. Why would you believe somebody that's not strong enough to take you away from your struggles? Vote OG.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for a speech, and I'd like to invite the first speaker for the opposition.
Be advised in the Zoom chat, please. When people are suffering the deepest depths of poverty for reasons that are no fault of their own, it doesn't help for OG and government bench to preach morally and say that if you weren't successful, it must have been your fault, you are morally deficient. It helps when we recognize that people suffer for reasons entirely outside of their control and that we can fix their situation. One substantive claim from opening opposition on how we help the poor and worst off a lot more, both directly and societally, because we no longer blame individuals for circumstances outside of their control, with a lot of integrated rebuttal. But I want to be clear about what teams stand for in this debate. Opening government tries to hide behind this word of control. And I would just encourage us to read the info slide for some of the things that they have to support. It's not just you are in control of your life and that you are able to make it better. It's that if you are good, you are wealthy. Wealth is a symptom of moral goodness, and therefore being poor must be a symptom of being morally bad. Anyone who is poor has not been rewarded in the same way, and therefore they are blameworthy. On opposition, however, we can stand for arguing how these sorts of things are not your fault, because that is the fundamental difference between liberation theology and prosperity theology. And we're able to explain to people that the poor are like deserving of heaven, deserving of this world's goodness as well, and actually achieve advocacy for them. Before I get into the substantive, one extraneous piece of rebuttal about how apparently on OG's world, people just look at the evil in the world and think that God must be bad. I think this is just like a well-known problem in religion that hasn't caused that many problems historically. It's the banality of evil. There's lots of ways to explain it. The fact that God gave people free will and that free will can sometimes cause problems. But I think we'll explain throughout our substantive material as to why we best fix those kinds of evils, which is something that God can enable people to do through like giving people purpose and divine meaning in their lives, a lot better under our side. Substantive material then on why we help the poor a lot more. There's 4 parts to this. The first thing that I want to show is just in the vast majority of situations when people are in the worst kinds of poverty, and note that opening government agrees that like poor people are the majority of believers around the world, why this poverty is not the fault of individuals, and it is not something that people can fix on their own just by working a bit harder, as they say, or pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. 4 structural reasons. The first is just because in many parts of the world, there is a severe lack of opportunity. When you don't have access to education, where you own a tiny plot of land, those are not the circumstances in which working a little bit harder really changes your material situation. The second part of this is that wealth begets wealth and is self-reinforcing. And if you don't have money in the first place to pay for education, to pay for investment, to take out a loan, then you're not going to be able to earn money anyways. The third part of this is insofar that we are often talking about developing parts of the world or parts of the world that have experienced structural things like colonization, the mineral wealth and other kinds of natural wealth of these countries has been exploited and taken away through those kinds of processes which left people poor and is incredibly difficult to fix. The fourth part of this is when we're talking about minorities, oftentimes there's discrimination that individuals suffer that you can't really fix on an individual level. The significance of all of this analysis is that while opening government can tell people that they supposedly have control, or they ought to work harder, or they ought to pray more, this like is not sufficient because people don't just go to church like 24 hours of the day. They still see the physical circumstances of their life. They still try hard and they still fail. And I think that's the worst situation for people. When that happens, then, this is the next part of the case, why must government bench necessarily blame poor people and establish them as morally bad for the outcomes that have befallen on them? 3 reasons. The first part of this is just that it's logically necessary. The info slide tells us that in prosperity theology, if you're good, then you're going to have physical wealth and success. The necessary implication of this is that if you don't have material wealth or success, then you weren't good in those kinds of ways, given that God is able to influence the world, and therefore you must have been bad, you must have been morally bad, and you are blameworthy. The second part of this is just if you think about the ways in which this is preached, you would necessarily have to celebrate wealth and also criticize the poor because this is in line with your teachings and because you want to motivate people to follow these kinds of teachings. Again, that requires you to blame the poor for the situations that they're in. The third part of this is just this plays really well into right-wing and conservative narratives about people like being on welfare, just being really lazy and how they could have improved their lives. This is a narrative that exists already and is likely to contribute to this being a really strong thing as well. The significance of this analysis then is that if you're in a very bad situation, that is probably not your fault for the reasons we've established. The church now necessarily tells you on government bench that it is your fault. I think that is the worst thing that can happen to you, A, because it is unjust, just because it's not your fault in the first place, and B, because it is incredibly demoralizing to know that you are just a bad human being instead of the product of some evil that is outside of your control. Before I move on to impacts of this opposing government.
Right, so the incentives for religious leaders to want to like keep people within the flock exist on both sides. So under liberation theology, how do you imagine this coercion will happen?
Like, I think you can explain how you can square the circle of prosperity theology and like not pushing off poor people. That's not a worry for us. I think when it comes to liberation theology, this is something that is incredibly popular, and we tell people that the situation is not your fault and you can fix it through these ways. Let's get into how this gets fixed on 2 levels and the impacts of this. The first part of this is I think we get a lot more direct support for individuals who are poor and in bad situations. A, because now it is no longer their fault. We are more likely to get direct donations and charity. Note that this is something that happens quite often within the church. But also, I think the kinds of direct help that goes directly to poor people, which is what we're likely to get under our side, is better than the best case of gov, when you might donate to the church or you might pray a little bit more. I want to observe that the good that government celebrates is often just praying if you're morally bad, which doesn't really help poor people, or donating to the church, who, like, in many cases, like, keeps the money for themselves, builds a new building, or does only, like, gives money to their followers and so on. The second and more important impact here is just the structural change that is only accessible in the world of opposition, because we see the poor as suffering from some kind of massive injustice that requires a massive fix. I would note that liberation theology is a very powerful movement. It is something that many, many people subscribe to, because the poor are more numerate in number and are able to, like, vote based on those kinds of grounds. You also have countries around the world, like much of Latin America and so on, where this is really popular. What this means is that even if you're not winning elections all of the time, you are able to win elections sometimes, and as a result, pass legislation that massively improves the lives of individuals, whether this be like social welfare nets or anti-discrimination legislation and so on. I think the intuition for this is that in a lot of Latin American countries, when you had more progressive governments supported by liberation theology, we had more progressive policy. When we had black churches supporting civil rights in the United States, we got civil rights there. We helped the poor a lot more. We're very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank Speaker Omar for his speech, and I'd like to invite the second speaker for the government.
Okay. Does it work? Give me a second. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Opening opposition spent some 5.5 minutes explaining why, oh no, you don't get to solve these sorts of problems, and then they spent some 1.5 minutes explaining why they will solve them. Unless they backload in DLO and are being dicks about it in this sort of way, then I think this is not enough in all of this. Firstly, responding to their solutions to this problem, then responding to the other stuff. They have two solutions. Firstly, this increases direct support for poor people. Firstly, know that there are symmetrical reasons why support for poor people would exist. One, other parts of Christianity tell you to give to charity, right? Like being charitable is good to go to heaven, or this particular thing. Why is this a tipping point for people to give money to charity for poor people? I don't know. Secondly, there are symmetrical reasons why this would not happen in this sort of way. This idea that poor people are responsible for their situation, is this going to be the only thing that pushed this idea? They themselves say right-wing push this anyway. This belief already exists. Rich people want to justify to themselves that they're rich because they're smart in this sort of capacity. Why wouldn't they believe this idea anyway? Why would they conversely believe that the poor people weren't responsible for their type of thing? Secondly, on structural reasons, for, on structural change, communism, and all of this particular thing. Firstly, there are other factors why you would do this anyways, right? Our motion does not preclude people from, voting for communism or this particular thing. They need to explain why the unique incentive given by this thing telling you that the rich people are evil is the necessary thing that would sway you from either voting or not voting in this sort of particular thing. But also, secondly, there are many factors why this would not work in this sort of ways, right? Like big corporations lobby against this, for all of this. Political change is often very slow. Politicians can hide behind this particular thing, debate all the time, or this without ever actually making the change. But thirdly, why is this good? Why is communism good? I say communism is not good in this sort of way. Redistributive policies are not good. But I will even give reasons. I won't just be room and say we don't know this is good or bad. Firstly, many governments are corrupt, which means that redistributive policies that give money to the poor are often lost along the process in this sort of particular case. Secondly, in many places there isn't wealth enough to redistribute, and things like higher taxes, all of this particular thing actually lower growth, lower job creation, lower all of these particular things. So it's even questionable if the results they aim for are good in this particular case. You know what is probably good? Being good to your family around you, probably working comparatively harder on these particular things. This is probably a certain good in this sort of case rather than the speculative good. Secondly, they say you will blame yourself if you do not succeed. A number of responses to this. Firstly, note that religions have incentive to not phrase this in this way. Sure, if it is given in the very simple way of the info slide, it seems logical that this would work. But religions have control over how they phrase it. They can say things like, okay, maybe in some cases this is the case, but maybe not in others, right? Like the way the way God tested Job, or of these particular things. Why? Because they want to retain people within their churches. Closing government points out all of these particular things. So this incentive exists. Also, secondly, they give reasons why if you're born poor, you will not become Jeff Bezos. How many reasons do they actually give why if you're born poor, you won't become slightly richer in this sort of way? Why you won't slightly improve your material conditions or these particular things? Even if you improve your material conditions 20%, you will feel reward. You will feel that you have achieved something in your life, that you have gone further than where you have started. What are their reasons for why you won't be able to do it? They say, firstly, there is lack of opportunity in many places. I want to flag that this is getting increasingly solved in this particular thing. One, more access to online education post-COVID means that more people can access things like learning English, like all of these particular things. But also, secondly, more online services post-COVID, like drop shipping, all of this, Andrew Tate, Castle University, all of this particular thing, which means that globally you can access certain opportunities you could not before. So if you put effort into this, you're going to get some degree of reward out of this. Second reason they give is, discrimination means you won't ever succeed, but know that most people succeed within their own communities, or how do you say, people look like them and won't discriminate them nearly as much in this sort of way. Here is the structural reason why you are likely to succeed if you comparatively work hard and all of this. But even if you don't work hard, why you're likely to go further than where you started. Firstly, there is necessity for promotion always because there's turnover of things like management and all of this. So you need new and new managers. So you need to promote new and new people. This is always true in this particular capacity when people retire, when they move jobs and all of this. So people will get promoted and they will become like this. But secondly, know that the more important you become to a company, the more you can leverage your salary and stuff like this. The more essential you are, the more work you do, the more you say, okay, if I quit, I fuck you over, raise my salary, or these particular things. But thirdly, and this is the thing we say you don't improve your wage, but you feel as if your life has improved if you do things like being good to the people around you, like putting in effort for your children and for all this particular thing. And this is the crucial framing. This is super difficult to do in this sort of case. The regularness of life is like crushing for many people. They need to be told that there is a rainbow at the end of the tunnel and all of these particular things in order to put the effort to help people out in their community when they need to do all of this. This means you are more likely to your community, you have comparatively succeeded in your life, even if your wage has not gone up still.
The info slide says faith, positive attitudes, and good deeds, not putting in the work for your employer. Interpretation for the motion, what you have to protect is simply false. You don't get to say, read the Bible and instead of analysis.
No, man. Working hard is also a virtue in the Christian religion. Right? It's also something that you're told, be devout, be working hard on all this particular thing, provide for your family, mind you. This is something very important in the Christian religion. But even if it's not direct work, okay, man, being good to the people around you, all of this particular thing. If this is your conception of this is still a good thing, and we get societal benefits when people do this, both to their own lives and to the society around them. We give you a case for the soul. They give you some communist bullshit, all of these things. Finally, weighing on feeling in this particular case. Say you do feel bad if you fail. Say you might, right? How do we weigh out against this? Firstly, know that you feel bad when you fail anyways. Sure, you may feel that now you have not been good enough for these particular things, but otherwise you feel bad because, you can't afford food and all of this. You can't afford nice vacations or this particular thing. You can't afford the basic things that make your life happy. If you feel bad anyways, if you are poor in this sort of case, why is this the most important change in how you feel or these particular things? We say, if this improves your life even slightly and the life of the people around you, it's a much more tangible benefit on utility at the point where you feel good anyways. But thirdly, you only feel bad at the end of your life because otherwise there is always the hope of in the future I'll get better and stuff like this. So you only feel bad for some 10 years at the end of your life, but throughout the rest of your life, not only do you do better deeds to generate more utility, you also feel there is more hope in your life. You feel more motivated to continue all of these particular things, which is a good feeling when often it's so hard to do this, both us.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for his speech, and I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition.
Just checking I'm audible. Okay, good. Opening government, I think, when dealing with our case, it's a bit lazy because they like to point to all the little things we support. They're like, oh, people will give to charity anyway. That's symmetric. Oh, people will campaign for good anyway. Oh, that's symmetric. People will stigmatize the poor anyway. Oh, that's symmetric. And then their unique benefits are like, oh, people will work hard and look after their families. Like, come on, that is quite clearly like something they already have every single incentive to do. Like, they do not provide any tipping point analysis at all. Clearly, people want to get wealthy. By God. So the first part of this speech I'm going to spend time doing is saying why liberation theology is good. The first thing it does is it gives the poor, just a great deal of dignity, far more so than otherwise, because it says that they are victims of an unfair order in society. It says that they are still valuable people who are, necessary parts of society just like everyone else, rather than saying that they are just people who are like, less morally virtuous and who didn't have enough faith to get money. Second of all, it makes people campaign for change. Things like the civil rights movement were built on the back of a Christian faith that emphasized justice in society among all else, that emphasized building the kingdom of God rather than solipsistic trying to work to get rich and leave everyone else behind you. Because one, you need religion to highlight that this is something that is wrong in society, because many people see unfairness and do not bat an eyelid because they're so accustomed to it. You need religious leaders to say that inequality is wrong. Second of all, it's really hard to motivate people to get out into the streets. Saying that God wants you to do this is something that is really good at motivating people. And third of all, religion is uniquely good at organizing people because you have networks of churches that can put together the infrastructure, that can hire the large amounts of buses that are needed to drive large amounts of people from the countryside to the capital and so on. So when opening government is like, oh, they do this anyway, or like, oh, corporations lobby against it, grow up, give some real responses. Unfortunately, it's too late. The other response they have is like, oh, why is communism good? Like, luckily, we weren't campaigning for the murder of landlords. We were campaigning for things such as policies that provide the poor with the most basic level of welfare, such that they don't starve to death when they get a disability from getting from like a factory accident or something. Things like allowing women the rights to work outside the house. Things such as resisting dictatorships, which liberation theologists in Latin America were often at the vanguard of. All of these are very worthy causes. They're hardly evil little communism. Like opening government is startlingly ungenerous here. The third thing we said is you get far more charity and solidarity. And we would note on our side that emphasizing that injustice is bad doesn't just mean you lobby governments. It means you often do things directly to help people. It means you set up soup kitchens. It means you offer jobs to people who are without jobs. It means you directly offer help to people who are persecuted from the state, and you provide a welcoming community for them that doesn't stigmatize them, that says that they're valuable, and so on. What are opening government's responses to this whole stuff? They say, first of all, there are symmetric reasons to help the poor because the Bible tells people to give to charity. But seriously, the question is that, well, the Bible says to be generous, but it doesn't and it says to be generous to the poor and whatnot. But they say on their side, the poor are people who are less worthy of help from other people because, after all, if they were so virtuous, they would get rich. And so it's a question of to whom you should be generous. Maybe people will be generous to people in their family. Maybe they'll be generous to other members of the church. But on their side, they're not getting generosity to a large number of people who are deemed to be undignified and people who don't love God enough on their side. Whereas on our side, we have undiscriminating charity for all in need. Second of all, they say people are going to stigmatize the poor anyway. I've already got mad enough about opening government being lazy and talking about symmetry, but would note just the enormous size of normative power that religion has to be able to change people's minds on a large number of issues. And anyway, if all of this is symmetric, then all of opening government is symmetric. We might as well just give up and stop debating. The second part of this speech, actually, before moving on to the second part, I'll take closing. Opening.
It's not symmetrical. We explained this thing. Sorry, I was to the bathroom. This is different than other rewards like heaven because it's comparatively closer and all of this. You are symmetrical, not us.
No, you're symmetrical. Come on. Okay, now that is a more direct response. Here's why prosperity theology is bad. First of all, responding to two main claims from opening government. They say, one, people feel in control. We say, one, no, this fails when you don't get rich. Opening government responds, being like, oh, you might get a 20% pay rise if you're more effective at, weeding in your, little subsistence farm. You're able to sell, 20% more coconuts than otherwise. Like, look, people still compare how well off they are compared to people around them. It's clear that you're not going to convince them that they have like ultimate success. But B, it's like this is hardly like the great divine reward that you expect for being the most like the best Christian in town. But second of all, we say people on our side still feel in control too. They're like, oh, you think that God's like a weakling, he hasn't fixed anything. Andrew's already responded to that. But also would say that, you know, there's still the implication that people have enough power to make society a fairer place. You have the ability to change the conditions of everyone around you, to change the policy of the government, the ability to feed the hungry, to clothe the sick. And like these are all things that like people still have a great amount of power and free will for on our side. Sure, you might not be able to get rich instantly. They can't do that on Gov either. We say on our side, you still have an amount of power. Second of all, they say that people are really nice now and work hard. First of all, there is still reason to be nice to others and provide to family. They say, but getting rich in like 20 years or like 10 years is something that's a really good incentive. But like, yeah, being able to like sell things a week from now for more money, like, you know, you get money soon if you work hard. Like there's still incentives to go to your job. Like they're like, oh, well, this is a better incentive than heaven, but there's a better incentive than the incentive that they give, which is like the literal money you get from doing your job. There's absolutely no tipping point there. But second of all, again, as I've already emphasized, is the question of to whom you are nice, because on their side, it is not the poor because they are seen as lazy and morally lacking. We say that prosperity theology is bad for two reasons. First of all, it justifies the status quo. Because it says that God is already allocating his rewards, it means that the people who are without those rewards are seen as morally unvirtuous. Opening government is like, oh, well, we wouldn't phrase it like this. But if they're phrasing it as like, if you are virtuous, you have an increased chance of getting rich, then being poor is still a pretty good indicator of not being virtuous. And so the exact same line of logic. And when they're like, oh, just like, oh yeah, and also like them walking back this line just means that their case just becomes weaker and they get fewer benefits. So they're being like they're like only reducing the size of their harms for reducing the size of their benefits, not going to change the outcome of the debate. The second thing we say is that prosperity theology stigmatizes poorer people and means that they are far less able to get all of the benefits of being part of a religion. Closing government POIs saying, well, you know, you can't be that bad if you're a religious leader. You've got to keep people in the church. You can't have them leave. You know, that's why, for instance, Christianity in medieval Europe was so kind to everyone in it. That's why, for instance, cults are so generous to their members. Why Wahhabists are so nice to everyone who's within their flocks. And, you know, that's why Hinduism treats the lower castes so well. It's really hard to leave religions. One, you're convinced that the religion is true. You're not going to just suddenly convert out of a consideration of self-interest. But second of all, there are punishments for leaving. There is stigmatism for leaving. And that's why prosperity theology is so worthy of our opposition.
Thanks, Vicky, very much for your speech. And now I'd like to invite the third speaker for the government.
Right, can you hear me? Okay, assuming you can hear me. Yep. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So the one thing that opening up is not going to be able to accuse us of is shirking our burden. The problem with opening government is that they want to run the ideal version of prosperity theology. And obviously, if I'm telling you to do work and try to improve your life, agency is probably a good thing there. Ironically, OO is uncharitable in terms of the charity issue, because obviously, one, other groups as if to provide charity, but two, as a church, you need the fellows alive in order to take money from them. So you have an incentive to run things like soup kitchens to keep them alive. But what I'm more surprised by is how overly charitable they are to opening government. Because I think in reality, what prosperity theology has looked like has been shaming or blaming the poor to a significant degree. But the outcome of this tends to be draining the money of the poor, telling them to stay in church and keep donating more to the church, to pay so much, to spread their faith again and again on the weekends, and at the expense even of some of their work, because that's what the church wants. They want you to push and push and push for more followers. That's why the extension from closing government is going to be on why agency is still valuable in the face of having less money and in the face of rampant exploitation by prosperity theology. I want to note that this is the most relevant context in the round for two reasons. One, because there's always the propensity for it to happen, and that any religious leader can potentially become less charitable. But two, because these are probably the instances in which ops case works best in terms of them talking about moral shaming, for example. So why is it that in this context, the agency, the opening spend about a minute and PM on is still valuable? The first important thing to note is that you don't think that you are exploited. And this is important. You are thoroughly immersed in the belief that because through this, you are going to succeed through several reasons. One, because the church tends to create a context in which you believe it. Like when I went to Europe before Worlds, the extent to which like your church buildings and all create a sense of awe in you, or the fact that even within like auditorium and whatnot, the number of people that pack into the place creates this belief through community and creates an authority figure for that church. Secondly, the extent of ritual, the fact that if you like watch these happen, so like when I was in Vienna, for some reason, there was always this prosperity gospel channel on in the motel TV. And what they kept doing is having like call and response sessions that make you feel even more like a part of this. But third, they push out people who succeed or pretend that they succeeded and talk about how these fellas by sowing seeds were able to get so much money back and consequently were able to succeed. And the existence of these people makes you believe that you succeed. The point of all this characterization is that it exists in a thoroughly compelling frame of mind and gives you a clear target of belief that people succeeded. What does this mean? That means that indeed that these individuals are genuinely acting in what they think is in their best interest at that point in time, and therefore it is different from other forms of exploitation. We might oppose exploitation in the sweatshops of Bangladesh because these fellows know that this is a bad thing for them and they know that they shouldn't be exploited by this. They just have no better choice. This is different because in this case, even if they might not have made an active, informed choice, they certainly believe that they did, and consequently they are acting in that frame of mind that says, I made this choice. But what about when you fail, right? And this is where the bulk of response of like positive material and clash with OO comes in. Because OO's big problem is that these fellas feel blamed. And I have two responses. The first is I think actually people don't mind feeling blamed, and in fact sometimes want to feel blamed. Here is an example. The starting point of a lot of religion and folk religion in history is people trying to explain the unexplainable. They don't understand why the hell an earthquake hit them. They don't understand why their crops got ruined by flood. And the explanation that they come to almost always has come down to something to do with themselves. No matter where you go around the world, it has been, I can do this ritual that will satisfy the gods. I did not create enough crop to sacrifice to the gods. And what all of them, or like I did not sacrifice a child to the gods, right? And what all that means is that communities have been willing to take a loss on themselves, a significant loss, in order to feel like there is control. And there's two reasons for this. The first is that everything that we do only has meaning, and our lives only have meaning if we feel like it is impacting the world in some way. Consequently, what you want is the direct ability to feel like what you're doing has that change. Secondly, it's because people are egoistic. They want to believe that they are at the center of their own story because everything they do in life comes from their perspective. So it's horrible to feel like your own perspective is meaningless. That's why even feeling blamed is critical to feeling that you matter and feeling like you have the ability to improve things for your lot. But secondly, it is a gamification, and this is important. On that side, on our side of the house, it is always possible because whether you have succeeded or not is unfalsifiable. What that means, if you haven't succeeded, you can always try, and a little bit more might be what succeeds. What makes you change? The comparative on that side of the house is that the impossibility is stuck and it's in your face. You're constantly told that you completely failed and you haven't been able to achieve the success they want because people on a day-to-day basis reject you. Every election is a slap in the face when you're not able to vote in a redistributive government. So that lack of gamification changes it on that side. It makes it pointless on that side of the house. It's just like gambling, right? We allow people to gamble, and sometimes people find gambling a great way out of their problems because they feel that thirst and that possibility of success. I want to note here that liberation theology is also very exploitative in a few ways. One, protesting, asking people to protest against the threat of violence. Two, donating to protest. And three, disenfranchising individuals who try to choose to improve their lot on their own. They do all this in the hope that other people will help, but they don't actually have agency in getting to the outcome. Only we do. Yes, OO.
Yeah, is exploitation, misogyny, racism, etc. all fine if it's internalized and you don't realize it?
Yeah, so this I know this POI puts me in a pretty bad position. And the answer I'm going to give is short. Here's why. We know it's a lie, right? You and I might objectively think it's a lie. But here's the difference. In this case, like number one, it's not objectively known that it's a lie. And the reason for this is that you have, in the same way that we might say you have no epistemic ability to determine whether God exists, we don't have epistemic ability to determine that God does not exist. And consequently, I posit that imposing that view on individuals is no more intellectually superior than anything else. But second, the question I want to ask is, can't we believe in lies? And here I posit that we ask people to do a lot of hugely exploitative things for lies. The country is an imagined community for which I had to spend 2 years of my life and be technically ready to lay down my life at any moment for. The church as a whole is built on something that, as I've just proven, is at best a 50-50 guess as to whether this fella exists, but we still decide that it's legitimate for us to force people into a position where they give up so much of their life to the church. The reason this responds to that argument is that insofar as we don't have the epistemic ability to say that you doing these things now is not worth it because insofar as they can say that taking the harm now is worth because you go to heaven later, and we can't determine that that's not true, then the only legitimate way out is for these individuals who genuinely believe in it to be able to express themselves in the way they want to and live their life the way they want to. The only difference, therefore, is that we explain why people want agency in a world where the ability to morally determine that they have no rights whatsoever is illegitimate. That's why we propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for speech, and now I'd like to invite the third speaker for the opposition.
Am I clearly audible? Okay, just 1 second. We want to save some pages here. Okay. 3, 2. I'm going to do 3 things in this debate. First thing, I'm going to rebut both governments and take them out of this round. Secondly, I'm going to explain to you why on our side of the house you get more buy-in to this preaching. Nobody has analyzed it. Everyone just assumed that it will, but it is something that in the debate I'm going to win this also as something that is logically precedent to all of the things that you have heard so far in the debate. Lastly, I'm going to talk about extremism in the religion. Firstly, rebuttals to OG, because in both responses to the POIs that I ask and in DPM's explicit analysis, they concede that they only want to that the poor only want to marginally better themselves. And on our side of the house, you simply can't do it because we have to support communism and you have no things that you own, right? The thing is that they present to you a false dichotomy. On our side of the house, we do not have to support communism, even though they have analyzed it like that, right? But rather, and read the info slide, we on our side of the house, we oppose the significant accumulation of wealth and power. Why does this wash out all of the things that we have got from the opening government? Because all of their impacts about getting some control, getting some money, all of that, do not accumulate to the impact of significant accumulation of wealth and power. Therefore, we can have it on our side of the house. This takes out OG, but why is this also a better engagement to OG than OO? Because note, OO through all of DLO's responses answer OG on their weak side. That is to say, they say the incentive to better yourself is symmetric, whereas the stronger side of OG is the ability to better yourself, since on our side of the house, as per OG, you cannot do it. Therefore, when we answer the ability to the side of OG, this rebuttal also supersedes the engagements that came from OO. Secondly, on the closing government, the last minute of a member gave us a round losing concession for the closing government because they tell us, we know it's a lie, but it's not known as objectively a lie, right? The thing is that on their side of the house, you can test it and look at reality and figure out it's a lie. It's not too hard. You pray and pray and pray, you're still not rich, right? You figure out it's a lie, there's not many answers to that. On the comparative on our side of the house, what you get is salvation, which per definition happens only after death, and you cannot test it, and therefore this analysis can only work for our side of the house. First case about more buy-in. Framing for why this is very significant, right? This is not a debate about which set of belief is better in a vacuum, but rather whether Christian leaders should do it, right? There's a big logical gap in all of the groups in this debate between the leaders actually preaching about this to people actually buying into this, and therefore we're going to fill in this gap. 4 levels of structural analysis here. A, the Christian theology supports our side. Why is this the case? Because in Christianity, the basis is giving from yourself, right? This is the most basic theme in Christianity. Jesus died in order to save other people. You need to turn the other cheek and actually give to the others, right? Thou who feeds the poor of his country, and all of these things in the Bible, all of the Christianity is based on giving to the others and selflessness and all of these messages. This supports our side of the house. What happens on their side of the house? You work for yourself, not for your community. You do not seek to help others, and you actually what this actually does is the message on their side undermines the most basic premise of the religion. Therefore, the people who are Christian, who are receiving this message, are likely to opt out more on their side of the house and actually opt in more on our side of the house because they believe in this message more in the first place. Secondly, we think that on our side of the house, it is vastly easier to convince people to opt into this idea. Why is this the case? Because note, Christian leaders work in specific regions, right? In each region, you have specific leaders, etc. If you, on our side of the house, we can utilize this and tell people, look, if you join us, you do not only work for yourself, but rather you join a community where people want to help each other, where people seek to support one of the other, because we believe in giving the wealth to everyone. Whereas on their side of the house, it is every man for himself, and even if you believe us, you still only have to work for yourself, right? Thirdly, the extent of the reward. On our side of the house, we promise them salvation. This is an eternity of spending time in heaven. On their side of the house, they promise them maybe some more money, maybe some more power, which is a significantly smaller impact, something that is a significantly smaller reward, and therefore it is much more likely that they buy into. This is exactly why Nietzsche says that Christianity actually idealizes death, because they want to go and they go to the heavens and all of these things, and they prefer that to the material things that happen today. Fourthly, community. On our side of the house, you join a society that supports you in all of these things. But no, this is something that is unique also to religion, because people who live religious communities oftentimes have a hard time actually integrating in other society. What does this way do in the debate? A, it wins because without this analysis, all of their impacts cannot stand, since people do not buy into this idea in the first place. Our analysis exists logically upstream to their analysis. They need us to stand. Secondly, this is logically precedent to all of the analysis that is coming from the governing bench, because since they don't buy into this idea in the first place on their side of the house, they don't get to claim any of the impacts that they tried. This argument is in and of itself round winning for the closing opposition. Before I go on, I'll take closing. Opening.
This is only a valuable extension if you prove why this belief is good. You don't do it. Opening opposition barely does it. Most of their cases why our thing is bad. How can this take debate?
Sorry, rules of debate, okay? Firstly, I integrated many positive impacts, such as like getting to salvation, getting to your society, all of these things. Secondly, already beat you on this point, so I beat them because we exist logically upstream. Thirdly, we exist logically upstream also to your analysis. You wash out, and we have already beaten you in direct rebuttal, so you are directly out, right? But second case about extremism. What happens on their side of the house, right? There is a race there's a race to the bottom. Why is this the case? Because we say, as per the analysis of the opening government themselves, people are selfish. They want to accumulate more wealth because they feel the immediate benefit of it immediately, right? What does this mean? They have the maximal incentive on their side of the house to be extremely selfish. How does this look like, right? If I want a lot of money in a capitalist society, what do? I'm a workaholic, right? I work myself to the maximum. On their side of the house, the thing that I need to do to accumulate this wealth is be extremely religious. What does this look like? This looks like extremism of religion, right? I need to be deeper and deeper into religion. I need to stray further away from sin. This means you get a closer society. This means more people who are minorities out of the society, right? Like LGBTQ and all of these things, because these are the most basic things that we actually believed in the first place. You get more extremism, less happiness. We exist upstream of all of the debate, therefore we win.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for his speech, and I would like to invite the last speaker for the government. And now would like to invite the last speaker for the opposition.
Am I audible? Okay, great. I prepare my PYs in the chat, please. I will start my speech on 3, 2, 1, and so our CEO is about to win this debate. I believe that we give you 2 main points that engage with all of the room, and they are actually logical prior to everything that we are till now. First one, we explained to you about all the promotion and how it's influenced the amount of people that will join and how this is going to change their belief, because now this is a common beliefs and common message that most of the people can relate to about the less selfishness, selfness. You understood me? And I believe that this is something that most people can be feel that they relate to. But rather than this, Omar explained to you about the community. You feel that they have some common faiths and they can relate to one to another, and this is something that creates much bigger and much more united community that can help each other. But rather than this, he also explained to you about the extremists, about the religious extremists, because we believe that on the government side of this debate, we are not going to get the actual benefits that the religion can give us, but rather than this, we are going to push everyone to the extreme, to the race to the best wealth and all of those things. And this is something that we want to prevent, because we believe that the religion can help us in a much easier way. So one main thing from what we heard from CG, because I think that they did not actually answer to most of what we heard, but most of our rebuilding is going to be integrated. They tell us one main thing about we did not explain about different backgrounds and how they're going to fit in and how they're going to get into this community. I believe that we do not need to explain about different backgrounds. This is OO case. They rely on the different backgrounds in order to get fundings and in order to get more money for most of the community. I do not think that this is something that we need to stand on. All of our case still stands because we gave a much better community which helps each other. We do not think that the wealth actually needs to rely on this. But let's start with we are going to do it we are going to ASF above OO, and then I'm going to mitigate with everything that we heard from government. So let's start with OO, because I believe that they gave us 2 main cases. The first one is where we are going to help more poor people, and second one is about focusing on the belief in the religious that we lose if they will not going to get rich on government side. Let's start with more poor people and where we are going to be able to help them, because OO say that poor people are harder to get out of this circle, and we agree with them, but they explain us that we can help them by legislations and by direct support and by fundings and all of those things. I believe that as far as they agree that most of the people inside this community and inside this religion are going to be poor, we are not going to be able to earn enough money. I believe that the wealth and the money are important, but they are not the main thing that can help the unprivileged people, as far as everyone agree that most of the people are unprivileged. But how we are going to get more help to those poor people on our side of this debate? I believe that my partner gave you 2 main things in this. He explained to you why we have a better belief, because those are common values about selfless. We believe that those things are things that direct us, both if we are religious and both if not. And this is something that people outside of the religious can relate to, and this is something that can help them to feel more connected to the religion and to fit in. But he explained to you about the things that they are just relevant more for the all of the society. We believe that both if you are just if you are unprivileged or that you are a privileged person, you can relate to those values rather than to talk only about God, about the individual and the God relationship. What we explained to you at the overall is about the bigger community that feel they have a common faith. Those people can now help each other because they believe that their destiny is actually influenced by the others' action inside the communities. This is something that creates much more unite, and this is something that is much more valid, that is a much better validation that you're actually going to help each other and make sure that everyone are having a much better in their life. We believe that on this specifically we are above OO because we are first just logical prior. As far as we explained to you why we are getting more people that are getting inside into to this religion, we are much more likely to get better help. But rather than this, I believe that we have a much long-term impact. We do not lie only on the ability to get funding. We are just lying on the ability to create a better community. About the second case, our second case is about the belief that focus on the belief in the religion that is going to be loose if you will not get rich. We believe that the religious is just a spectrum. We explain to you why you are going to only believe in this when you believe in the values that they represent, and when you are going to be able to not go to the race and do all the actions of the belief. I believe that on this we are just much more nuanced, but rather than this, I do not think that this was their main case. So even if not, I do not think that they wait why this is in somehow important. Let's go over to governments, but before that, I would love to take engage from OG.
there are many other factors which are responsible for buy-in, like being born into Christianity or the fear of going to hell if you don't believe. How can buy-in be the debate-winning thing?
Those people are going to stay in the religions anyway for what you said by yourself. We believe that the main people that are going to increase the amount and change in this debate are the people that are not inside this community right now, and the promotions and the leaders that doing the promotions are going to get them into these religions. But rather than this, I believe that people are going to stay in the religion when they believe that they have the ability to when they have some community that trusts them and community that helps them to create a better religion and to enjoy more. Let's deal with government, because both governments are talking with us about the agency and the feeling of control. OG gave us about the feeling that they have some hope. I believe that this case is true only in the first year of the religion. But if you do not get better, you will just stop to try so much harder. I do not think that their case is standing in the long-term impact. And this is exactly what also CG are telling us. They tell us that when you give this value and meaning, you can change, then this is what gives you some agency. I do not think that you have any ability to change. Even if I believe that I'm going to get first in this round, as far as I'm not doing a good work, this is not something that is going to be changed. And this is something that is important because both governments are not understanding. On our side, I believe that we proved why we get much more agency. My partner explained to you that you will feel too much commitment and you will always chase after the getting more wealth, which is not going to be such profit as they explained to you. But that means that they lose their control and go after religions without criticizing it. But rather than this, OG talked with us about improve myself and economically and socially. I believe that this is a spectrum. While government focus on the actions and the belief between the God and the individual, in compared to our side that focus on the actions between the individual to the society. So only in this, it means that you are getting much more focus on the actions in the belief that are being as a good person. We cannot change the wealth so much, but we believe that we can give them the community that can help them and be there and be beside them. But we believe that rather than this, we have much more ability to continue on the belief. On our side, we give you the community and the message that more people can feel relate to, which can help you to keep a belief for a longer time. From all of these reasons, please see you.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for the speech and everyone for this debate. Once again, I'd like to congratulate to all 4 teams for breaking at this competition. And I'd like to invite everyone who is not judging to leave the Zoom and